I was a jail nurse for about 3 years in a correctional facility that housed approximately 1,300 inmates. Loved the job. Would have stayed longer, but administration sucked. But that's another story. Anyway, I worked night shift, and I've had some creepy shit happen that just can't be rationally explained. I worked both booking and infirmary, but the majority of the incidents occurred in infirmary. Okay, so I was there maybe a month. Not a new nurse, but new to corrections. Anyone who has spent any time in a jail will tell you that when those heavy doors slam shut, it is a very distinctive, definitive, loud sound. To get into the infirmary, you have to have a key or be buzzed in by central control. So I'm sitting at my desk and I hear the metal door outside my office click, like someone from Central has unlocked it, and it opens about halfway, and then just slammed shut. Now in my office, there's a huge glass window so that nursing staff can see any inmates that are about to enter. So when the door slammed, I thought it was just the officers fucking around, and I jumped up and went to the window. No one was there. I called Central, and the officer that answered sounded like I just woke him up. I said, "Ha ha, very funny." He had no idea what I was talking about. And I knew this officer. I was surprised that he would go along with any type of prank, because frankly, he was kind of a jerk-off, with absolutely no sense of humor. So I just brushed it off. I sat down, and everything just changed. It felt colder, and I felt like I was being watched. I was just all around uncomfortable. I took my stethoscope from around my neck and put it on the desk. I went into the medical department. I stayed in medical for a few, talking to the staff in there, and then went back to my office. When I walked in, I went to grab my stethoscope off the desk to check an inmate, and it wasn't there. I looked on the sides. I looked underneath. It just wasn't there. I should mention that when I left my office, I did lock the door as per protocol, and I'm the only one on shift with a key. Now I think I'm going crazy, so I start looking everywhere and I cannot find it. Now in my office, there's a large closet that holds all supplies. This is also locked, the key being on the set of keys that I carry. Anyway, later in the shift, I needed to go into the closet and get something. I really don't remember what. And sitting in the middle of the floor is my stethoscope. I picked it up, and the heavy metal door outside my office clicks again, opens halfway, and slams shut. I locked the closet, locked my office, and went out for a smoke. I was scared shitless, but I had responsibilities and patients to look after. So eventually I go back in. And I swear the whole atmosphere felt lighter. It was warmer, and I just felt more comfortable. After my shift, the central officers rewound the tapes for me, and I saw the doors just open and slam shut, with not a single person near them or in the hallway. I wish I could say that was the last time that happened, or that I got comfortable with it. I did not, because each time it happened, it seemed that the doors slammed harder, and that uncomfortable feeling lasted longer and longer. It felt almost like being stalked. Things that went missing were found in different parts of the jail. My pen case in the women's wing, my med sheets in the solitary central control room, my portable blood pressure cuff in the kitchen. And each and every time something of mine would show up in some other part of the jail, the officers and I would look at the tapes and see no one. Remember I said I felt like I was being stalked? Well, that's because all these things happened to me, but no other nurse who worked nights. Not one other nurse who worked on my days off had any doors click or open or slam shut. Their stuff didn't disappear and then reappear somewhere else. It was just me. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down that this type of incident never ever occurred before. It got to the point for me that I just started not staying in my office. I just got all my stuff that I needed for my shift and sat at the officer's desk. I did that until I left there and got another job. And I haven't had anything like that happen again. This happened several years ago when I was living in Sierra Leone. The country was about 10 years out from the horrific civil war that had ripped it all apart. Hearing stories just from the village I lived in would give me chills. Awful things happened during that time. Soldiers would place bets on the sex of an unborn child, then rip the fetus out of the mother to see who was right. They would nail the genitals of elders to trees and force them to tear themselves away or be shot. They talked about the water towers they used as prisons during the war, with about as much distaste as anything else. But I never saw one and was always puzzled by their mention. Then, on a hot afternoon, well, they were all hot, I was biking through jungle and spotted a giant rusted water tower jutting through the palm trees, relic of a failed foreign aid project. It was quiet on the road, and I laid my bike down, walking 50 yards through the low brush and trees toward it. It was composed of a huge circular stem, enclosed on all sides, rising up to the bulbous tower above the canopy of trees. I was a curious fool, and pulled the branches away from the steel door. It was locked with a bar from the outside. I tore the bar up, and the door cranked painfully open to blackness. I had my camera with me, and used the flash to look inside. Just metal grating, ascending pipes, and a ladder on the far side. I flash revealed several more times, and finally worked up the courage to stick my head in. It was a heavy, dripping darkness forever above me. I took a step in, and another flash revealed a series of 2 platforms with ladders, reaching up to the next level, where, at the top, a long human face, white and chalky, with mouth agape, leaned out over the uppermost ledge. It screamed out a sound I've never been able to fucking forget, then jerked backwards. The entire structure shuddered, and the structure felt more than sounded like something exploded out the side of the water tower. I fell backwards out the door, numb and cold. I ran the hell back to my bike, falling and trembling, running like a dog in a thunderstorm. I honestly feel cold and get goosebumps whenever I think about that. I hate that I have this memory. Firstly, I'm 24. I am a prison guard in a federal correctional facility somewhere in North America. I usually work night shifts, and in fact, I've adjusted quite well. I maintain a healthy routine and diet, and I exercise regularly and routinely get 7+ hours of sleep during the day, to give you a picture of my mental health. Also, I have experienced some strange paranormal things in my life before, but I remain skeptical. Anyway, essentially one night a little while ago, I was working on the maximum security unit of our correctional facility. It was relatively early in the morning, and my partner had gone up to do their own thing for a while, before our obligations. Seeing as this is pretty normal, I threw my feet up on the desk of the control post, and began reading my book to kill some time. The way I was facing, I could see the monitors over my book, so if something happens, I'll notice. Now, anyone who works down there knows that weird things happen regularly. Shadows moving, things moving on the cameras, strange sounds. but most of us chalk it up to the fact that generally it's late at night, 3 to 4 in the morning, and we've been up since probably 3 or 4 p.m. the previous day, so we just ignore it. This time, while I'm reading my book, I see movement on one of the cameras. I check all of the cells. Everything's good. I look back, and there's movement on a different camera, and then a different one. Every time I look at one, something's happening on a different one. Now, when I say movement, I mean I can see a figure moving, or I can see things on a table or countertop moving. After about 30 seconds, everything sort of stops. I take a deep breath and tell myself that it's probably just my imagination, and not to worry about it. So I lean back, throw my feet back up, and get back to my book. Here's where things get really creepy. As I'm reading, a completely black and large figure appears outside my control post, in the exact spot a person would be if they needed to communicate with me from outside the control post. There's actually a large silver mouthpiece that we use to communicate when the control post has to be secured during the day. This figure looms there for probably no more than a second or two, and then disappears. Again, I just sort of sit back and try not to think too much about it, although I'll admit that my nerves were a little rattled regardless. Anyway, my partner comes back down to grab his things before his obligations take him back up to the main part of the correctional facility. He sits down and we talk for a minute, and then I tell him what I'd experienced. We both laughed and said it was probably nothing. In fact, he actually said, if there was a ghost here right now, he'd tickle my balls. We both laughed some more, and then he told me to basically stop being a pussy. I convinced myself that I was just abnormally tired and had been seeing things. He leaves to do his thing, and as I'm getting off of the maximum security unit, one of the female inmates on our segregation range begins screaming incoherently. She presses her emergency-only button. I radio my friend to come back down so that one of us can go check. He immediately comes back. He asks me what the hell is going on. I told him I had no idea. She just started screaming at the top of her lungs as soon as he'd left. He decides that he'll go check on her, so he takes the disable key for the alarm and proceeds to her door. Since the segregation range is right beside the control post, I stood by the door to listen, and she was pretty much screaming, "You've got to fucking help me. He's trying to kill me. Don't let him kill me." At this point, she's crying hysterically and pounding on the door. She actually hurt herself trying to bust the gigantic steel door open. My friend turns to me, slightly pale, and we both shrug our shoulders, not really sure what's going on. He calmly explains to her that she's been locked up for days, and that the institution's been locked down since the previous evening, and that no one had gotten in and she was safe. No one could hurt her. She continued to scream and cry hysterically. "You idiot. You don't fucking understand. It's my husband. My husband is here and he's trying to kill me. Please help me. Let me out of here. He's right behind you." At this point, my friend is frozen in raw animal terror. I, standing by the door, can see that there's no one behind him, but a tangible presence was definitely felt by all of us on that range. He later told me that he was really scared, even though he knew no one was there. He felt it, and he couldn't turn around. After some talking, we eventually got her to calm down. She eventually explained that every so often, when she's been a bitch, her own words, her husband comes and haunts her and abuses her like he used to. She says it starts with nightmares, and eventually leads to his presence wherever she is. I told her we would get the psychology and healthcare teams to see her as soon as they were in for work. She begged me to see if they were in now, and I agreed to call, but told her I couldn't promise anything. I phoned healthcare, and naturally no one picked up, so I hang up before the answering machine kicks in. She eventually goes back to sleep. My friend goes on with his business, and I'm stuck alone in the control post for the next 30 minutes. Nothing else happened while I was there, and I was thankful for that. I told my coworkers who'd come in for the day shift what had happened. No one could really believe me, but they could see that I was shaken up by it, and they know that I'm not the kind of person that would make something like this up. I finally get relieved and head home for an unsettling sleep. Now the next two details are going to sound made up, kind of like the cherry on top, but I assure you they actually happened. First, my friend does some research on this particular person, and it turns out that she killed her husband. He was violent and abusive. He was approximately 6'7" and about 275 pounds. The creepiest thing about this was, and maybe I'm extrapolating, but that pretty much fits with the figure I saw outside of the control post. Second, I guess right after I'd left, about the time that the rest of the institution's staff comes in for their shifts, my coworkers got a call from healthcare. They asked if anyone had called and left a message. My coworkers told them that I had called about an hour and a half before anyone had got there, but hung up without leaving a message. They said that was extremely strange because they got a message at about 5:30 when I called, and all they could hear were two people screaming. That creeps me the hell out. Truthfully, my eyes watered the entire time I was recounting this story and going over the details in my head. Despite being a skeptic, I'm almost certain that I saw her deceased husband. Back in 2015, I was working as a live-in home health aide for a wealthy family. It was just me and my patient living in a very nice condo in a quiet neighborhood on a golf course. We were the youngest people who lived there. I was 27 at the time. My patient was a 21-year-old male with Asperger's, SPD and BPD, and some substance abuse problems. He had recently gotten into some trouble and been legally declared incompetent. We will call him Jake. Jake was a nice kid, but he had severe emotional issues and almost no social awareness, compounded by the refusal to take prescribed medication, which worked incredibly well when he took it, and drug abuse. He was taken advantage of a lot because of the crowd that he hung around with. Right before I moved in, 6 friends came to hang out with Jake one day and ended up staying for 2 weeks, draining Jake's bank account on various drugs, meth, coke, MDMA, weed, and absolutely trashing the condo. Jake was lonely, and he never said no to people. He wanted them to like him. Honestly, I think Jake was 14 or 15 years old mentally. I think he turned to drugs to deal with depression and anxiety, and also to fit in with the people around him. He's much better now. It was a sweet gig. I was paid very well, lived in a nice condo rent-free, and basically just had to keep our house clean, keep food in the fridge, and make sure he took his medication. When I moved in, my boss, Jake's mother, warned me about a girl who occasionally stayed with her father. He was our downstairs neighbor. She told me that the girl was named Amber, and that she looked younger, but she was 37 years old, tall, blonde, and very thin. She was right. She looked much younger, like 25-ish. She said Amber didn't have a car or a job, and that she was an addict who liked to use Jake. Amber's father had custody of her 2 children, and she would come visit the kids and stay for a few days a week. She said one day Amber asked to borrow Jake's car for an hour and ended up running off with it for 2 weeks. Amber was also the one who introduced Jake to the 6 friends who trashed the condo. She was bad news and was never to be allowed in the condo. She wanted me to call her immediately if Amber stopped by, or Jake went anywhere with her. After the theft, she put a GPS on Jake's car, and allegedly she could stop the engine. My boss made it clear that she didn't expect me to be a security guard, just to notify her of things that were going on. Leading up to this event, I had a few run-ins with this Amber, where I had to politely tell her things like she was not allowed to come into the apartment. Jake could not take her to the store or anywhere. No, Jake can't go to a party at her boyfriend's house, etc. Amber was always spaced out, like she talked slow and seemed wide-eyed and off. She explained to me that she had been hit by a car while riding a bike recently, and complained that she was the one who ended up going to jail. I was like, how? Apparently, she takes a lot of Xanax and was under the influence, so I think that explains the spaced out part. Anyway, she was never aggressive, but it was clear that she didn't like me, and often would say things like, Jake is his own person. He's a 21-year-old man. He doesn't need permission. And whenever she spoke to Jake, when we'd see her at the gym or in the parking lot, she'd be whispering to him, no doubt trying to manipulate him into giving her money or something. Anyway, on to the incident. Jake was out of state with his father, giving me a mini vacation. My best friend was staying over to spend a few days with me, and we were drinking PBR and watching RuPaul's Drag Race. It's like 11 p.m., and we hear a light knock at the door. I go investigate through the peephole and see it's Amber. I ignore her. She knocks louder about 30 seconds later. I watched her leave through the peephole and sit back down, telling my friend the situation. 5 minutes go by, and she's back. This time she's pounding on the door like a cop. I'm getting pissed because I'm off work. I don't want to deal with her crazy, especially when my friend is over. So I say nothing and go back to the couch. She knocks again. She knocks like a normal person and starts saying, "Hello? Jake? OP? I need help. Hello?" I still don't answer. Then I hear her trying to open the door. It's locked. Always. I'm a habitual door locker. Well, this enrages her. She starts screaming and pounding on the door nonstop. I get up and look through the peephole again, and she looks like a demon. Her pupils were huge, so I think she was on something. She looked crazed. Her hair was tangled and wild. She was sweaty and angry. Looking back, I'll never forget those wide pupils looking at me through an evil glare. I ask her through the door what she wants. She said she needs to speak to Jake right now. He owes her money, and she needs a ride to her boyfriend's house right now. I tell her Jake isn't home. Then she asks if I'll take her. I tell her no. I've been drinking and I'm going to bed. She let out a frustrated scream, punched the door, and left. My friend and I went to bed shortly after. Didn't hear from her again after that. The next morning, we're getting ready to leave to go to breakfast. I hear a knock at the door. A policeman's knock. You know the sound. I look through the peephole expecting to see Amber, but this time it's an actual cop. I open my door and can see my parking lot is full of police. There's a van marked crime scene unit and an ambulance. I honestly assumed Amber overdosed or something. The cop wants to ask me if I heard anything strange last night. I tell him about my encounter with Amber and ask if she's okay. He tells me she is in custody for the murder of her father. Does Jake own a crossbow and is it missing? Yes and yes. It's been missing for weeks. He says I need to speak to some detectives at the station. So I don't know if she came to my door before or after she murdered her father with a fucking crossbow. But the detective told me that his theory was that she was a heroin addict and that she was withdrawing and needed to get to her boyfriends for more dope. She tried to get Jake to drive her, and when that didn't work, she asked her father, who refused. This is what went down. They argued. Other neighbors heard that. She killed him with the stolen crossbow and stole his truck. She only got a mile away before she was signaled to pull over. She led the cops in a high-speed chase over the span of 2 counties before she finally lost control and crashed. The cops were only pulling her over on suspicion of drunk driving, but when they spoke to her, she told them that she was speeding because she needed to check on her dad. She thinks someone stabbed him. They asked her why she thought that, and she wouldn't answer. They sent police for a welfare check, and they found him before her sons did. So, that was the time my crazy drug addict neighbor murdered her father with my patient's crossbow. Let me first give some backstory. When I was in my late 20s, I had a job as a corrections officer at the local county jail. I am a female, so I was assigned to female cells mostly. I soon became a favorite of the ladies because of my easygoing nature. Anyone can make a mistake, so I treated them as a person and not like a number. Now, most of the inmate population seemed to be late teens to early 20s, and I guess they found me relatable. After my training period, I worked my cell block alone. I mostly worked in the closed pod. These ladies were in their cells for 21 hours a day, only coming out for 3 one-hour recreation periods. One in the morning, one after lunch, and the last one at night. There were 4 different groups ranging from 3 inmates to 25 inmates. After being on the job for a month, I started hearing some of the women on my shift mention hating the night shift because it was spooky. I kind of laughed it off. Boy, was I in for it. It just so happened my next shift was the night shift. After an altercation, I locked down early that night. I had just come back from my break a little after 12:30 a.m., and my sergeant had just left the pod. She covered for me during my break. I had to scan at 1 a.m., and it's not unusual for inmates to be sitting on their bunks reading at this time. At the back of the pod is where we put those in isolation. Some were for infractions, and some for mental issues. When I left for my break, it was empty, so I was surprised to see someone sitting on the bunk of the isolation room 1, reading. I asked if she was okay, and she smiled and nodded her head, and said, "Yes, ma'am, just reading my book." I said okay and went about my duties. All during my scans that night, she was sitting there reading, and we would speak. She was the only inmate up that night. That's a weird thing just by itself. So I stopped my last scan before my 4:30 break and told her my sergeant was coming in if she needed anything. When my sergeant walked in, I told her all was quiet, that everyone was asleep except for the girl in isolation that came in during my break. She looked puzzled and told me no one came in. I told her the girl in room 1. I said I've talked to her several times, and we walked down to the room. When I tell you that that room was empty, I almost lost it. I swore to her I wasn't crazy. She smiled and told me that 2 years prior to me coming to work there, a young lady had a seizure and died in that room. Apparently, most of the COs and even a few inmates have seen her. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Links to all my shit are down in the description. Come follow me on social media and join my Discord. And, as always, be good to animals, even people. So, holy shit. I'm hot as fuck.
Ja, snämmak, bärksbes, hörs. Jedes Coyotes. It's gonna be a jungle book episode. I'm just trying to finish this one story.